Before we break down everything we actually know about Resident Evil 9, take a second to like and subscribe if you enjoy my videos. Before we get into the video, I just want to say thank you for the support on this new channel. To give something back, I'm doing a small giveaway. On release day, February 27th, 2026, I'll be giving away a Resident Evil 9 game code or store voucher. To enter, just comment Resident Evil 9 below. I'll put all the names into a wheel spin and announce the winner on the 27th. And yes, your name can be entered more than once across different videos. Just keep it to one comment per video. With the Winter's Saga officially wrapped up and Capcom staying unusually quiet, the franchise is at a crossroads. This next game will decide where Resident Evil goes for the next decade, and the clues are already there if you know where to look. Part 1. What Capcom has actually confirmed and what they have not. The lead up to the release of Resident Evil 9, which we now officially know is titled Resident Evil Requiem, has been one of the most calculated marketing campaigns in Capcom's history. For those who have been following the news since the Summer Game Fest in 2025, the picture of this game has become remarkably clear. We are no longer in the realm of vague rumors. Capcom has officially confirmed that Resident Evil Requiem will launch on February 27th, 2026. This date is significant because it places the game right in the heart of the franchise's 30th anniversary year. The studio has also confirmed that Koshi Nakanishi, the creative force behind Resident Evil 7, is returning to the director's chair. His involvement is a major indicator that the studio is prioritizing atmospheric depth and a return to the series' more grounded, terrifying roots after the high fantasy detours of Village. One of the biggest official confirmations that changed the direction of the community discussion was the announcement of the protagonists. Capcom has revealed that Resident Evil Requiem features a dual protagonist system. We will be playing as Grace Ashcroft, a character who initially seemed like a fresh, everyman lead, but was quickly revealed to have deep franchise ties. Grace is the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, the investigative reporter from the Resident Evil Outbreak series. This connection is not just a nod to long-term fans. It is a core part of the narrative logic of the game. Alongside Grace, the legendary Leon Scott Kennedy returns as a playable protagonist. This confirms that Capcom is moving away from the isolated Winter's Saga and is ready to reintegrate the heavy hitters of the 1990s into the modern RE engine era. The setting has also been stripped of its mystery. Unlike the early speculation that suggested a remote island in Southeast Asia or a Mediterranean village, Capcom has officially taken us back to where it all began. Resident Evil Requiem is set in the ruins of Raccoon City, 30 years after the nuclear strike of 1998. This is a massive confirmation because it transforms the game from a standard sequel into a historical audit of the series' most iconic location. Specifically, the narrative centers around the Wrenwood Hotel and the remains of the RPD station. The city is now a radioactive exclusion zone, a ghost town reclaimed by the forest and shrouded in a thick, unnatural fog. This return to Ground Zero is the definitive statement for the 30th anniversary, proving that the shadows of Umbrella have never truly faded. What is interesting about these confirmations is how they contrast with what Capcom has not said. While we know the title, the date, and the leads, the specific nature of the BSAA's role in the city remains redacted. We know they are there, and we know they are compromised, but the full extent of their corruption is something Capcom is saving for the player to discover. There is also the matter of the gameplay perspective. While many expected a repeat of the first-person-only approach, Capcom has officially confirmed that Requiem will offer a switchable first- and third-person perspective at launch. This is a massive technical achievement that shows Capcom is listening to the community's desire for choice. It bridges the gap between the intimate horror of Resident Evil 7 and the cinematic action of the Resident Evil 4 remake. The silence that does remain is strategic. Capcom has established the what and the where, but they are being very careful with the why. By confirming the return of Leon and the introduction of Grace Ashcroft, they have set the stage for a story about legacy and aftermath. The fact that the game is launching in February 2026 tells us that the development cycle has been intense and focused. Nakanishi's leadership suggests that even with a high-profile return to Raccoon City, the game will not be a simple nostalgia trip. It is a clinical, terrifying look at the ruins of the 20th century's greatest biological disaster. The official confirmations have set a high bar, and the countdown to February 27 is now the primary focus for every survival horror fan on the planet. Part 2. Why RE9 matters more than any previous entry. Resident Evil 9, now officially titled Resident Evil Requiem, is currently standing at the most significant crossroads in the history of the franchise. Since the release of Resident Evil 7 in 2017, the series has enjoyed a massive resurgence by focusing on the intimate horror of the Winters family. However, with that story now finished, Capcom has made the definitive choice to merge the modern horror aesthetic with the classic ensemble cast. This is why Requiem matters more than any previous entry. It is the game that must reconcile the two different identities of the franchise. It is tasked with being a landmark 30th anniversary title that satisfies the older fans who miss the urban dread of the 1990s, while engaging the millions of new players who joined during the RE Engine era. The pressure of the 30th anniversary in 2026 cannot be overstated. This is not just another sequel. It is a eulogy for 3 decades of survival horror. By returning to Raccoon City, Capcom is putting their entire history under a microscope. They are revisiting the site of the series' original sin and attempting to tell a story that feels fresh, despite the familiar setting. If Resident Evil Requiem gets this wrong, it risks being seen as a hollow nostalgia trip that relies on past glories rather than innovative horror. The stakes are immense because the franchise is currently at its peak popularity, and this game will define the narrative and mechanical direction of the series for the next decade. It has to prove that the legends like Leon Kennedy still have a place in a world that has moved past the era of accidental outbreaks. There is also the challenge of evolving the RE Engine formula. Resident Evil 7 and Village were successful because they were radical departures from the action-heavy style of the mid-2000s. Now that the Winters saga is over, Capcom has to prove that they can maintain that same level of horror while scaling up to a larger urban environment. The move to a dual protagonist system with Grace Ashcroft and Leon Kennedy is a strategic attempt to balance vulnerability with veteran experience. Grace, as the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, provides the grounded, investigative perspective of a newcomer, while Leon provides the tactical weight of a survivor. This balance is what is at stake. If the game leans too hard into Leon's combat prowess, it might lose the horror that Nakanishi worked so hard to restore. Furthermore, Resident Evil Requiem matters because it is addressing the global aftermath of 30 years of biological warfare. The world of 2028 is a place where bioweapons are no longer secret experiments, but militarized realities. This is a narrative escalation that moves beyond a single mansion or a remote village. By setting the game in the radioactive ruins of Raccoon City, Capcom is forcing the characters and the players to confront the true scale of the Umbrella legacy. It is a game about the realization that the world is permanently broken, and that the victory of 1998 was only a temporary delay for an inevitable biological collapse. This category of aftermath horror is a new direction for the series, one that feels much more mature and cynical than the earlier entries. Ultimately, Resident Evil Requiem matters because it is Capcom's biggest gamble. They are returning to their most iconic location with their most iconic character. But they are doing it through the lens of a new, vulnerable protagonist and a switchable perspective system. The success of this game will determine if Resident Evil can remain the king of the genre for another 30 years. It is a bridge between eras, a requiem for the dead, and a blueprint for the future. The community expectations are higher than they have ever been, and the fact that the game launches on February 27th, 2026, means that the reckoning is almost here. This is the moment where the franchise either cements its legacy or begins to fade under the weight of its own history. Part 3. The BSAA Betrayal, the biggest unresolved cliffhanger. If you look back at the ending of Resident Evil Village, you will see the most significant and disturbing cliffhanger in the history of the series. The revelation that the BSAA, the Bioterrorism Security Assessment Alliance, had deployed biological soldiers in the field in Romania was a total betrayal of the organization's founding principles. This is not just a minor plot twist. It is a systemic rot that has been building since the organization was established in the wake of the Umbrella collapse. Resident Evil Requiem must address this thread because it turns the world's primary defenders into its primary biological antagonists. The BSAA has moved from a philosophy of eradication to a philosophy of tactical utilization, and our veteran protagonists are now caught in the crosshairs of the very machine they helped build. The clinical reality of the BSAA betrayal is a study in how power eventually becomes the very thing it seeks to destroy. While the organization was founded by heroes like Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine, it was always vulnerable to internal sabotage. Over the years, shadow factions within the global security apparatus realized that the only way to combat bioterrorism was to control the biology themselves. This led to secret research projects that utilized refined strains of the T virus and other pathogens to create the tactical biological units we saw at the end of Village. By the year 2028, the BSAA has become a paramilitary force that operates with total legal immunity, conducting experiments in radioactive zones like Raccoon City to further their biological dominance. Chris Redfield is the primary catalyst for this investigation. At the end of Village, we see him heading directly toward the BSAA Europe headquarters, clearly looking for answers. In Resident Evil Requiem, his investigation leads him back to the Raccoon City exclusion zone, where he suspects the organization is conducting high-tier research at the Wrenwood Hotel. This is a personal mission for Chris. He is a man who has dedicated 30 years to fighting monsters, only to find that his own comrades have become the architects of the next apocalypse. This narrative thread provides the game with a high-stakes dramatic engine that goes beyond simple survival horror. It is a story about a veteran dismantling his own legacy in a desperate attempt to save his morality. Addressing this betrayal is also necessary for the state of the world in the mid-2020s. We are no longer in an era where bioweapons are the work of a single rogue corporation. We are in an era where the institutions of safety are the primary vectors for the pathogen. This creates a sense of systemic dread that is perfect for a 30th anniversary title. By making the BSAA a compromised entity, Capcom is exploring the horror of institutional failure. It makes the threat feel much more insidious, because you are not just fighting a monster in a sewer. You are fighting a system that has the resources of the entire planet. Grace Ashcroft and Leon Kennedy are caught in the middle of this corruption, forced to survive in a city where the good guys are the ones hunting them. Finally, the BSAA betrayal allows the series to explore the theme of control. The organization isn't just seeking profit. They are seeking to rewrite the social and biological fabric of the world. They believe that in a world of permanent biohazard threats, the only way to ensure peace is through biological slavery. This shift from corporate greed to ideological control is the true monster of Resident Evil Requiem. The game is a requiem for the innocence of the original STARS era, showing that the war was lost the moment the heroes started using the enemy's tools. The reckoning with the BSAA is the final judge of 30 years of biological warfare, and it is a confrontation that will define the future of every character involved. Part 4. Timeline and World State where RE9 fits. In universe, Resident Evil Village took place in 2021. Following the series' tradition of setting games near their actual release, Resident Evil Requiem is set in the year 2028. This puts the timeline exactly 30 years after the total destruction of Raccoon City in September 1998. This chronological placement is the narrative heartbeat of the game. By this point in the history of the biohazard world, the hidden lab era is officially over. The world of 2028 is a place where biological threats have become an integrated and militarized reality of global geopolitics. We have moved from the era of accidental outbreaks into the era of tactical deployment, where biological organic weapons are now primary assets used by private military contractors and shadow factions within global organizations. The world state in 2028 is one of cynical acceptance and systemic consequences. The Megamycete incident in Romania was the final proof that ancient, localized organisms could be harvested and weaponized with a level of efficiency that rivals modern science. Since then, the world's governments have been in a biological arms race. The ruins of Raccoon City have become the focal point for this race, because the radioactive soil is suspected of containing stable viral samples that have survived for 30 years in the exclusion zone. This turns the setting from a nostalgic location into a vital tactical asset. The city is a live fire laboratory, and the organizations like the BSAA are there to harvest the remains of Umbrella's original sin. The shift from accidental outbreaks to tactical deployment has changed the very nature of the horror. In 1998, the zombies were a mistake. In 2028, the infected are an objective. The world has become a clinical graveyard of 30 years of failed containment, and the public has become weary of the constant threat of extinction. This is the world that Grace Ashcroft and Leon Kennedy inhabit, a world where the air and the water in certain zones are permanently weaponized. The world is broken by decades of viral attacks, and the win condition is no longer just surviving the night, but preventing a total global systemic collapse. Resident Evil Requiem is a study of the aftermath, showing that the real horror of the mid-2020s is what humanity has become in its attempt to weaponize life itself. Furthermore, the timeline allows Capcom to portray the veteran characters as relics of a dead world. Leon, Chris, and Jill are now the old guard, the only ones who remember the world before the viruses became a standard part of warfare. Their mission in 2028 is as much about preservation of human dignity as it is about biological eradication. The world state is one of biological fatigue, where the human species is struggling to maintain its identity in the face of forced evolution. Requiem uses this setting to explore what it means to live in the ruins of the 20th century's greatest mistake. The timeline is the definitive judge of human hubris, and the return to Raccoon City is the final act of a play that has been 30 years in the making. Finally, the world state in 2028 provides the justification for the new biological threat. The Elpis pathogen, which we will encounter in the game, is a product of this new era of refined, militarized research. It is a threat that is subtle, controllable, and designed to subvert populations without the messy chaos of a T-virus leak. This is the reality of the 30th anniversary world. It is a place of high-tech bunkers and radioactive ruins, where the horror is no longer found in a shadow, but in the very systems of control that were built to protect us. Resident Evil Requiem is the record of this world's collapse, a clinical autopsy of a species that has finally run out of time. Part 5. Characters most likely to return and why. The 30th anniversary setting of Resident Evil Requiem provides a significant opportunity for the return of several legendary characters whose presence is essential for the narrative closure of the era. Chris Redfield is the obvious anchor for the story, given his direct involvement in the BSAA investigation and his rogue status at the end of Village. Chris represents the old guard that has been permanently changed by 3 decades of war. His arc is a study in institutional betrayal, as he is forced to dismantle the very organization he helped build. While the focus of the early game is on Grace and Leon at the Wrenwood Hotel, Chris's presence in the Raccoon City area is the catalyst that brings all the threads together. He is the man who cannot stop fighting, even when the world he is fighting for has already moved on. Jill Valentine remains the character that fans are most desperate to see return in a mainline entry. Since her absence from the mainline timeline for over a decade, her perspective is a massive missing variable. As a founding member of the BSAA and a survivor of both the Mansion and the Nemesis incident, Jill has the most at stake in the organization's downfall. Her return would provide the emotional weight required for a 30th anniversary title, bringing the original STARS survivor back to the site where her nightmare first began. Rumors suggest that Jill may be operating as an independent operative or a mentor to Grace, providing the tactical insight required to survive the Elpis pathogen and the radioactive ruins. Her return would be the ultimate gift to the fans, a requiem for the original generation of heroes. Leon Scott Kennedy has been officially confirmed as a playable protagonist, and his return to Raccoon City is a logical tactical choice for the narrative. Leon is the survivor of Ground Zero, and his history with the city and the DSO makes him the perfect candidate to investigate the modern corruption at the Wrenwood Hotel. Leon is portrayed as a world-weary agent who has moved beyond his idealistic roots, possessing a professional distance that reflects his years of survival. His role in the timeline is to provide the tactical weight of an experienced soldier, while Grace Ashcroft provides the investigative curiosity of a civilian. Leon's return to the RPD station is a visceral nostalgia trip for the fans, but it is also a clinical necessity to address the legacy of the G-virus assets that were left behind. Rose Winters remains a significant wildcard, despite the Saga Complete announcement. While her personal family story was resolved, her status as a high-tier biological anomaly means she is a permanent factor in the world's lore. Even if she is not a playable lead in Requiem, her unique biology is likely the reason why organizations like the BSAA and Dr. Victor Gideon are conducting experiments at Raccoon City. She is the living proof of a successful biological symbiosis. While we might not play as her, Her safety and her research data will likely be a core driver for the characters who are protecting her. She is the ghost of the previous saga that continues to haunt the future of the series, representing the new biology that everyone is fighting to control. The challenge with these veteran characters is that they create a significant horror problem. Chris and Leon are essentially super soldiers at this point, and it is hard to make the player feel scared when they are playing as men who have killed everything from zombies to global gods. Resident Evil Requiem addresses this by pairing the veterans with Grace Ashcroft. As the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, Grace provides the vulnerability that is essential for survival horror. She is an investigator, not a soldier, and her perspective allows Capcom to strip away the player's sense of security while keeping the legacy characters in supporting or dual roles. This balance ensures that the 30th anniversary is both a celebration of the legends and a return to the primal terror of being hunted in a city where you don't belong. Part 6. The new protagonist theory. In the lead-up to the release of Resident Evil Requiem, the community spent years debating whether Capcom would continue with a fresh everyman lead or return to the veteran cast. The reveal of Grace Ashcroft as the primary protagonist essentially bridges these two schools of thought. Grace is a civilian, an introverted FBI technical analyst who lacks the superhuman combat proficiency of a character like Chris Redfield. This makes her the perfect vessel for the return of survival horror. When we play as Grace, the game forces us back into a state of vulnerability. We are not playing as a soldier who can parry a chainsaw. We are playing as an investigator who must rely on stealth, environmental awareness, and a distraction mechanic involving her lighter and glass bottles to survive the night at the Wrenwood Hotel. However, Grace is not a total unknown. Capcom's decision to make her the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, the journalist from the Resident Evil Outbreak series, is a brilliant narrative move. It grounds the new protagonist theory in established franchise history. Grace is in Raccoon City to find closure regarding her mother's death at the Wrenwood Hotel decades prior. This personal connection provides a layer of emotional weight that a random new character would lack. By using new blood that is connected to the old blood, Capcom resets the horror tone while rewarding long-term fans who remember the struggle of the Outbreak survivors. It allows for a passing of the torch dynamic, where the legacy of the 1998 incident is filtered through a character who is experiencing the terror for the first time. The inclusion of Leon Kennedy as a second playable protagonist provides the tactical counterweight to Grace's vulnerability. This dual system is a direct evolution of the patterns we saw in Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil Village. Capcom understands that while fans love the feeling of being hunted as a civilian, they also want the empowerment of playing as a legendary veteran. Grace represents the cold bath of survival horror, where running is often the only option, while Leon represents the sauna of refined combat. This reset of the horror tone is essential because it prevents the player from becoming too comfortable. Just as you begin to feel empowered as Leon, the game shifts back to Grace, stripping away your weapons and forcing you back into the shadows. Potential lore theories suggest that Grace may even be a defector or a whistleblower within the system. As a technical analyst, she has access to data that the government and organizations like the BSAA would want to remain hidden. This puts her in a unique position where she is being hunted by both the biological monsters in the ruins and the human agents in the shadows. This category of protagonist allows Resident Evil Requiem to explore themes of institutional betrayal, from the perspective of someone who was supposed to be part of the machinery. It turns the game into a race for the truth, where the protagonist's best weapon is not a gun, but her ability to unlock the digital and biological secrets of the city. Ultimately, the new protagonist theory is about longevity. Capcom cannot rely on the original 1998 survivors forever, as they are now veterans in their 50s. Grace Ashcroft represents the future of the series, a character who is intellectually capable but physically vulnerable. By introducing her in the 30th anniversary title, Capcom is signaling that the next 10 years of the franchise will be defined by characters who must survive through their wits as much as their weapons. Grace is the requiem for the civilian survivor, a reminder that the real horror of a biohazard is what it does to the innocent people caught in the crosshairs of corporate and government secrets. Part 7. Setting speculation. Where could RE9 take place? While early community rumors suggested a remote island in Southeast Asia or a Mediterranean coastal region, the official reveal of Resident Evil Requiem confirmed a much more personal setting. We are returning to the ruins of Raccoon City, 30 years after the thermobaric strike of 1998. It is important to clarify that the city was not destroyed by a nuclear weapon, but by a massive heat-based blast designed to incinerate the biological threat without leaving long-term radiation. This is why it is now safe for organizations and investigators to return to the site. The setting is a ghost city, a decimated urban environment that has been reclaimed by nature. The streets are overgrown with thick vines, and a permanent, heavy fog hangs over the ruins, creating a sense of isolation that rivaled the Baker Ranch. The setting is primarily focused on two iconic locations, the Wrenwood Hotel and the remains of the RPD station. The Wrenwood Hotel serves as the central horror hub, a sprawling, claustrophobic environment that feels like a spiritual successor to the Spencer Mansion. It is a place of narrow hallways, hidden passages, and a dark history that connects directly to the Elpis project. Moving the setting back to Raccoon City is a strategic move for the 30th anniversary, because it allows Capcom to utilize the urban revival aesthetic. We are exploring the original sin of the series, but from a perspective of aftermath. The city is a monument to failure, and every room you explore in the hotel or the police station tells a story of the people who died 30 years ago. Why this setting affects the horror identity is a matter of clinical atmosphere. Unlike the open rural spaces of Village, the ruins of Raccoon City provide a caged feeling. You are surrounded by the skeletons of a once great civilization. The urban return allows for a mixture of high-tech government facilities and decrepit, haunted buildings. Theories regarding an island or Mediterranean location may have been based on early prototypes, or perhaps a secondary location in the game that has yet to be fully revealed. But the core of the experience is the Midwest. Raccoon City in 2028 is a biological reservoir where the remnants of the 1998 pathogens have mutated in the absence of human interference, creating a world that is familiar yet utterly alien. The setting also allows Capcom to play with the concept of ghost lore. Because Grace is an investigator, she is constantly finding files and recordings from the original outbreak. This turns the environment into a narrative puzzle. You are not just trying to escape. You are trying to reconstruct the events that led to the city's destruction. The Wrenwood Hotel, in particular, is described as a waking nightmare, where the layout seems to shift and change, possibly due to the influence of the Elpis element. This psychological layer adds a new dimension to the setting. moving it beyond a simple urban ruin and into the realm of a true horror landscape where the past is literally haunting the present. Ultimately, the return to Raccoon City is the definitive choice for Resident Evil Requiem. It anchors the 30th anniversary in the most important location in the series' history. It provides a sense of closure that an island in Asia could not offer. The city is the graveyard of the 20th century, and by walking its streets again, Leon and Grace are performing a requiem for a world that died 30 years ago. The environment is designed to be the most immersive and atmospheric in the series, utilizing the RE engine to create a beautiful decay that is as terrifying as the monsters that inhabit it. The city is the true antagonist of the game, a place that remembers the original sins of Umbrella and is finally ready to share its secrets. Part 8. The next bioweapon, what replaces the Megamycete. Following the fungal, memory-based horror of the Megamycete in Resident Evil 8, the series needed a threat that felt more grounded in the new era of militarized bioterrorism. In Resident Evil Requiem, this threat is centered around a mysterious element known as Elpis. While many have been quick to label it a standard pathogen, the lore suggests that Elpis is far more complex. It is described as being connected to a clandestine US government project and a sterilization strategy that predates the modern era. Elpis does not just create mindless monsters. It seems to interact with the environment and the human nervous system in a way that is subtle, controllable, and potentially rewrites the user's perception of reality. This is the biological reality of the 2028 world state. The clinical reality of Elpis is that it represents the shift from accidental outbreaks to systemic control. Unlike the T virus, which was chaotic and led to mass necrotic failure, Elpis appears to be a tool of precision. It is a controllable organism that allows for the creation of bino-soldiers who retain their tactical intelligence and can follow complex commands. This is exactly what a compromised organization like the BSAA or a shadow faction within the government would want. They don't want a city of zombies. They want a city of obedient, biologically enhanced enforcers. This synthetic parasite or neural hybrid threat is what Leon and Grace must face in the ruins. It turns the human body into a tactical asset for the people in power. Victor Gideon, the confirmed antagonist and former Umbrella scientist, is the architect of this new biological nightmare. His goal with Elpis is not profit, but a form of biological cleansing. He views the Elpis element as a way to sterilize the errors of the past and create a more perfect, controlled humanity. This moves the threat away from the gross-out mutations of the past and toward a more clinical, high-tech category of fear. The monsters you encounter in the Wrenwood Hotel are not just accidents. They are the results of a perfected sterilization strategy. They are clean, efficient, and terrifyingly intelligent. This biological slavery is the ultimate evolution of the work started by Oswell Spencer and refined by the shadow factions of the 2020s. Furthermore, Elpis seems to have a psychological component that explains the shifting, nightmare-like quality of the Wrenwood Hotel. It may have the ability to influence memory or hallucination, making the player question what is real and what is a projection of the pathogen. This would be a logical evolution from the memory-based themes of the Megamycete, but handled with the surgical precision of a laboratory project rather than a wild fungal bloom. It turns the biological war into a war for the mind. The Elpis pathogen is not just a virus. It is a system of control that is being tested in the Raccoon City exclusion zone. with Grace and Leon as the final subjects in a 30-year experiment. Ultimately, Elpis is the biological anchor for the 30th anniversary. It is the requiem for the old viruses, a synthetic hybrid that represents the peak of human hubris. It justifies the militarization we saw at the end of Village, and provides a reason for why the world's powers are so interested in the Raccoon City ruins. The Elpis project is the final judgment on the human genome, a weapon that doesn't just kill, but rebrands life into something that can be managed and deployed. It is the most sophisticated threat the series has ever seen, and uncovering its true purpose is the only way for Grace and Leon to prevent a global systemic collapse. Part 9. Gameplay Evolution. First person, third person, or both. One of the most significant technical and gameplay announcements for Resident Evil Requiem is the official confirmation of a switchable perspective system. At launch, players will be able to toggle between a first-person and a third-person perspective. This is a massive achievement for Capcom and a direct response to the first-person fatigue that had begun to settle in after 2 mainline entries and several years of DLC. By offering both perspectives, Capcom is bridging the gap between the 2 modern eras of the franchise. You can experience the intimate, claustrophobic dread of Grace Ashcroft's investigative segments in first person, or shift to the cinematic, tactical combat of Leon Kennedy in third person. This choice allows every fan to experience the 30th anniversary on their own terms. The clinical reality of this hybrid system is that it changes how we perceive the horror of Raccoon City. In first person, the narrow hallways of the Wrenwood Hotel feel like a personal violation. Every shadow is a potential threat, and the proximity to the monsters creates a visceral sense of helplessness that is essential for Grace's character. When you switch to third person, the game takes on the feel of the Resident Evil 2 and 4 remakes. You gain a better sense of environmental awareness and your character's physical presence in the world. This is particularly effective for Leon's combat segments, where tactical movement and parrying are key. The ability to switch between these 2 modes of fear makes Requiem the most flexible and technically ambitious game in the series' history. Following the semi-open design of Village, Resident Evil Requiem expands the open zone concept within the ruins of the city. The environments are more dynamic and reactive than ever before. This is where the switchable perspective truly shines. In the larger urban areas, a third-person view allows you to scout for supplies and monitor the movements of stalker enemies from a distance. However, when you enter a tight interior, like a hotel room or a sewer pipe, shifting to first person can heighten the tension and force you to focus on the immediate surroundings. This gameplay evolution isn't just a gimmick. It is a tool that the player must master to survive. It allows for a level of agency that was previously impossible in the fixed camera or single perspective eras. The community reaction to the hybrid system has been overwhelmingly positive because it addresses the action versus horror debate. By giving the player the choice, Capcom is admitting that both perspectives have their strengths. The first-person view is the cold bath of pure survival, while the third-person view is the sauna of tactical empowerment. This balance is reflected in the game's difficulty settings and resource management. Playing the entire game in first person is described as the true horror experience, while third person is seen as the cinematic experience. This dual approach ensures that Resident Evil Requiem is a game for everyone, from the 1996 veterans to the 2017 newcomers. The gameplay evolution of Resident Evil Requiem is the final judgment on the RE engine's capabilities. Capcom has taken everything they learned from the remakes and the mainline sequels and combined them into a single, cohesive package. The switchable perspective is the defining mechanic of the 30th anniversary, a technical requiem for the limitations of the past. It allows the game to be both an intimate, psychological horror and a high-stakes tactical thriller. By putting the choice in the player's hands, Capcom has created a game that is as much about how you see the world as it is about how you survive it. The ruins of Raccoon City are waiting, and how you choose to look at them will define your nightmare. Part 10. The villain shift from corporations to ideology. For decades, the primary antagonists of the Resident Evil series were corporations like Umbrella or Tricell, entities driven by profit and corporate dominance. However, in Resident Evil Requiem, we are seeing a definitive shift toward a more personal and ideological category of villain. The confirmed antagonist is Dr. Victor Gideon, a former Umbrella scientist who has survived in the shadows since the 1998 incident. Unlike the board of directors at Umbrella, Gideon is not motivated by money. He is motivated by a nihilistic ideology of closure and sterilization. He believes that the human species is a biological failure that has been permanently polluted by the pathogens of the 20th century, and he views the Elpis element as the only cure for this infection. This shift from corporate evil to ideological evil makes Gideon a much more terrifying and unpredictable enemy. You cannot bankrupt an ideology, and you cannot reason with a man who believes he is performing a holy sterilization of the planet. Gideon's presence in the Raccoon City ruins is part of a larger sterilization strategy, a US government-backed project that he has subverted for his own ends. He views himself as the judge of the 30th anniversary, the man who will finally lay the human race to rest to make way for a more perfected and controllable biological reality. This is a move from greed to divinity. Gideon doesn't want to own the world. He wants to rewrite its soul. The real theme of Resident Evil Requiem is control. While the BSAA's role is still being investigated as a potential storyline of corruption, the immediate threat is the ideological capture of the world's security apparatus. Gideon is not just a rogue scientist. He is a man who has infiltrated the highest levels of the sterilization strategy, using the government's own resources to conduct his experiments. This explores the horror of institutional capture, where a single charismatic and intelligent individual can turn an entire system of defense into a weapon of extinction. The villains of the mid-2020s are no longer companies in secret labs. They are the people who write the protocols for global safety. The ideological shift allows for a more adult category of horror. Gideon's primary weapon against Grace and Leon is not just a monster, but the psychological manipulation of their own memories and trauma. He uses the Elpis element to force them to confront their pasts in Raccoon City, attempting to break their will before he breaks their bodies. This makes the conflict in Requiem a war of philosophies. Leon represents the old guard's desire for survival and preservation, while Gideon represents the new world's desire for erasure and rebirth. The shift in the villain archetype reflects a world that has grown weary of corporate logos and is now terrified of the people who believe they have the right to decide who deserves to live. The villain shift in Resident Evil Requiem is the final step in the evolution of the series' narrative. Dr. Victor Gideon is the requiem for the corporate villain, a shadow from the past who has returned to finish what Umbrella started, but with a much more insidious goal. He is the biological reflection of a world that has lost its way, a man who believes that the only way to save humanity is to kill it. The reckoning in the Wrenwood Hotel is not just about stopping a monster. It is about stopping an idea that has been 30 years in the making. Gideon is the ultimate judge, and his sterilization strategy is the final trial for the human species. Part 11. What RE9 must answer. Loose threads. As the franchise approaches the massive milestone of the 30th anniversary, Resident Evil Requiem carries the heavy burden of closing out several narrative plot holes that have lingered in the background for over a decade. One of the most glaring questions involves the current status and leadership of the Connections. This crime syndicate was the primary architect behind the E-series and the development of the mold, yet they have remained a largely faceless entity throughout the events of Resident Evil 7 and Village. By bringing the story back to a domestic United States setting in the Raccoon City ruins, Capcom has the chance to show how this organization integrated itself into the American pharmaceutical and military sectors. If the antagonist, Victor Gideon, is indeed a former Umbrella scientist, his ties to the Connections could finally explain how the old Umbrella assets were liquidated and redistributed into the shadow market following the 2003 collapse. The community is looking for a definitive answer on whether the Connections is a standalone threat or merely a shell company for a more insidious global faction. Another major loose thread involves the fate of the E-series research data. While Eveline was destroyed and the Megamice seat was neutralized in Romania, the data from those high-tier biological projects did not simply vanish into thin air. The sterilization strategy mentioned in the files of Resident Evil Requiem suggests that the United States government, or a shadow faction within the security apparatus, has successfully refined the mold's ability to influence human perception and neural pathways. Fans are also looking for a definitive answer on the Natalia and Alex Wesker storyline from the Revelations 2 era. Since those events took place in 2011, the consciousness of Alex Wesker inside the body of Natalia Corda would now be fully matured by the year 2028, placing the game in the Raccoon City ruins, a place Alex would arguably be obsessed with as the site of her brother's greatest failure, provides a perfect narrative bridge to address whether the Wesker legacy is truly dead or just rebranded under a new name. The endgame of the BSAA corruption is the most volatile thread of all. We need to know if the organization was compromised from the very top of the international leadership, or if it was a localized coup by a specific European branch. If Resident Evil Requiem is truly about a global systemic collapse, then the downfall of the BSAA cannot just be treated as a background Easter egg. It has to be a foundational pillar of the plot that Leon and Grace uncover. These are not just trivia points for the die-hard fans. They are the structural beams of the entire franchise history. By answering these questions, Capcom can finally move the series out of the shadow of the Umbrella logo and into a new era where the consequences of the past 30 years are fully realized in the light of day. The Wrenwood Hotel is likely the place where these high-level documents are stored, making the investigation as much about the history of biological warfare as it is about surviving the present nightmare. Furthermore, the game needs to address the status of the family from Resident Evil 6. While that storyline was largely abandoned after the death of Derek Simmons, the idea of a secret society controlling the United States government remains a potent lore element. If Resident Evil Requiem is exploring the sterilization strategy as a government-sanctioned project, it would be the perfect time to clarify if the family is still pulling the strings or if they were wiped out by the BSAA during the mid-2010s. The fans deserve to know how all these disparate groups, Umbrella, Tricell, the Connections, and the BSAA fit into the single cohesive history of the biohazard world. Resident Evil Requiem is the final audit, the moment where the balance sheet of human suffering is finally tallied, and the true architects of the 21st century's misery are brought into the light. Part 12. The leaks separating signal from noise. Navigating the leak culture surrounding a project as massive as Resident Evil Requiem requires a cynical eye and a deep understanding of Capcom's internal development patterns. For several years, social media and forums were flooded with subtitles like Apocalypse or Revenant, but these often failed the most basic logic tests of the series' naming conventions. Most of these supposed leaks were nothing more than fan wish lists disguised as insider information. The leaks that actually carried weight were the ones that aligned with Capcom's technical trajectory, such as the move toward a semi-open urban design and the implementation of a hybrid perspective system. Reliable community insiders like Dusk Golem have a track record of being right about the general vibe of a project, even if the specific details shift during the final phases of development. When the Raccoon City setting was first leaked, it was dismissed by many as being too nostalgic, but it perfectly matched the narrative logic of a 30th anniversary milestone. Red flags in fake leaks are usually easy to spot if you know what to look for. Any leak claiming the return of Albert Wesker as a physical human being, or the total destruction of a major character like Chris Redfield in a leaked document, is usually intended as engagement bait for the community. Capcom tends to be more protective of their big four characters than the leakers often suggest, preferring to keep them as symbols of the franchise's resilience. The real signal in the noise was always the focus on a dual protagonist system and the return of a civilian lead with deep franchise ties. These details did not feel like fan fiction. They felt like a logical reaction to the first-person fatigue and the need to ground the horror again. By filtering out the noise, we can see that the real Resident Evil Requiem was always hiding in plain sight, built on the foundations of the RE engine's expanding capabilities. The credibility of a leak is also tied to how it handles the technical side of the game design. Rumors about advanced artificial intelligence for the stalker enemies and the use of path tracing for the lighting in the Wrenwood Hotel were signals that the game was being built specifically for high-end hardware. These are the kinds of details that a casual fan making up a leak would not think to include in their post. As we move closer to the February 27th, 2026 launch date, the leaks will naturally become more aggressive and frequent, but the core signal remains the same. This is a game about legacy, aftermath, and technical ambition. Anything that sounds like a generic action movie is likely a fabrication. Anything that sounds like a clinical and atmospheric autopsy of the series' history is likely rooted in the truth. Moreover, the leaks regarding the Elpis project were particularly revealing, because that name was tied to specific government projects in the game's lore. It suggested a level of internal knowledge that surpassed a standard fan guess. The leaks also correctly predicted that Capcom would move away from the gothic look of Resident Evil Village and toward a more clinical and industrial look for the Raccoon City ruins. This aesthetic shift is a major part of the game's identity, and the fact that it was leaked early suggests that the visual direction was set long ago. The process of separating signal from noise is an essential skill for any lore analyst, and Resident Evil Requiem has provided the perfect case study in how to navigate the modern age of digital rumors. Part 13. RE engine capabilities and what they mean for RE9. Resident Evil Requiem represents the absolute peak of what the RE engine can achieve on modern hardware. Since its debut with Resident Evil 7 in 2017, the engine has been praised for its photorealistic textures and incredible optimization, but Requiem pushes this into a new category of environmental horror. The use of path tracing and advanced global illumination in the Raccoon City ruins allows for a level of atmospheric dread that simply was not possible in previous entries. The fog in the city is not just a visual filter, it is a dynamic and volumetric element that reacts to the player's light sources in real time. When Grace uses her lighter in the dark hallways of the hotel, the light bounces off the decaying wallpaper and the damp air with clinical accuracy, making every shadow feel like a physical presence that could hide a monster. Dynamic artificial intelligence is another area where the technology directly shapes the horror design. The stalker enemies in the Wrenwood Hotel are not tethered to simple scripted paths, like Mr. X was in the 1998 era. They utilize a complex sensory mesh that allows them to hear the player's footsteps, see the flicker of a lighter, and even track the scent of a wounded protagonist through the ventilation shafts. This creates a much more reactive and unpredictable game of cat and mouse. The engine also handles the switchable perspective seamlessly, with animations that are specifically tailored for both first-person and third-person views. This is not just a camera swap, it is a total recalibration of the character's movement and interaction with the world. The technology allows the game to be both an intimate psychological thriller and a cinematic tactical experience without any compromise on performance. The RE engine's ability to render what we call beautiful decay is perfectly suited for a return to the Raccoon City ruins. The 2028 version of the city is a masterpiece of environmental storytelling, with high-fidelity assets that show the passage of 30 years. You can see the rusted metal of the RPD gates and the overgrown vines choking the life out of the old skyscrapers. This level of visual fidelity is vital because it makes the setting feel like a real place with a real history, rather than just a video game level. The audio engine is equally impressive, utilizing 3D spatial sound to ensure that every creak of the hotel floorboards and every guttural moan in the fog can be pinpointed with absolute precision. The tech does not just make the game look better, it makes the horror more inescapable by engaging every sense the player has. In addition to the visuals, the engine's processing power allows for seamless transitions between the larger urban zones and the claustrophobic interiors. This removes the loading screen immersion breaks that plagued earlier generations, creating a continuous flow of dread. When Leon moves from the open, fog-covered street into the lobby of the Wrenwood Hotel, the shift is instantaneous, maintaining the tension of being pursued. The engine also supports high-fidelity gore that reacts to the specific caliber of the weapon used, a clinical detail that fans of the Resident Evil 2 remake will appreciate. This technology is the backbone of the 30th anniversary experience, proving that the RE engine is still the industry standard for survival horror fidelity. Resident Evil Requiem is the ultimate showcase for a decade of technical refinement. Part 14. Marketing and Reveal. When will we actually see RE9? Capcom's marketing strategy for Resident Evil Requiem has been a masterclass in controlled anticipation and strategic silence. The long period of silence following the 2021 release of Village led to a massive build-up of pressure and speculation within the global community. This was not an accident. It was a calculated way to ensure that when the Summer Game Fest 2025 reveal finally happened, it felt like a global event of the highest magnitude. Capcom typically follows a specific reveal window, usually announcing a major mainline title 6 to 9 months before its scheduled launch. By debuting the trailer in June 2025 and setting a February 2026 release date, they created a tight and high-intensity marketing cycle that keeps the game in the public consciousness without allowing for hype fatigue. The 30th anniversary timing in March 2026 is the ultimate anchor for this entire strategy. Launching the game on February 27 allows the initial wave of excitement and critical acclaim to peak just as the actual anniversary month begins. This creates a halo effect where the game's success feeds into the overall celebration of the franchise's history. The silence lasted as long as it did because Capcom needed to ensure the move to a dual protagonist system and a hybrid perspective was polished enough to show to a cynical audience. They did not want to show a prototype. They wanted to show a finished vision that could justify the 30-year legacy. This patient approach is a sign of a confident studio that knows they have a high-quality project on their hands, rather than one trying to rush a product to meet an end-of-year earnings report. We can expect a final launch trailer in early February 2026, likely focusing on the emotional stakes for Leon and the deeper mystery of Grace Ashcroft's mother. The marketing has moved away from the action movie trailers of the Resident Evil 6 era and toward a more elevated horror style that emphasizes atmosphere and psychological dread. The trailers utilize silence and environmental storytelling over explosions and one-liners, reflecting the game's shift in narrative tone. Capcom is selling a requiem, not a revolution. They want the audience to feel the weight of the 30-year history, making the reveal of Raccoon City the ultimate mic drop moment for the anniversary. The marketing campaign is the final piece of the puzzle, a clinical execution of a strategy designed to cement Resident Evil as the king of the genre once again. Furthermore, the use of viral marketing has played a key role. Secret websites and cryptic social media posts from fictional accounts linked to the Wrenwood Hotel began appearing in late 2024, building a foundation of mystery for the lore analysts to dissect. This alternate reality approach engaged the die-hard fans who will fact-check every claim, creating a layer of immersion before the game was even officially titled. By the time the Summer Game Fest trailer arrived, the community was already primed to recognize the locations and the characters. This synergy between the marketing and the game's internal lore is a high-tier tactic that Capcom has perfected over the last decade. Resident Evil Requiem is not just being sold as a game, it is being sold as a historical event. Part 15. What RE9 needs to succeed and what could go wrong. For Resident Evil Requiem to be considered a true critical and commercial success, it has to pull off a nearly impossible balancing act between deep nostalgia and genuine innovation. Returning to the Raccoon City ruins is a huge win for the 30th anniversary celebrations, but it also carries the inherent risk of being seen as a simple retread of old ground. The game needs to provide a new and compelling why for being there, which is why the Grace Ashcroft investigation and the Victor Gideon plot are so important to the narrative structure. If the game relies too heavily on remember this room moments without adding new gameplay layers or atmospheric shifts, it will fail to capture the modern audience that expects more than just a trip down memory lane. Success means using the ruins of the past to tell a profound story about the future of biological warfare. Avoiding the mistakes of Resident Evil 6 is the other major hurdle that Capcom must navigate. That game failed because it tried to be everything to everyone at once, resulting in a bloated action fest that completely lost its horror identity in favor of blockbuster spectacle. Requiem must maintain its focus on survival, even when the player is controlling a veteran like Leon Kennedy. The combat should feel desperate and high stakes, with limited resources and powerful enemies that cannot be easily parried or ignored. If Leon becomes too powerful, the tension evaporates and the horror dies. The horror identity has to be the primary priority at all times. On the flip side, the game cannot be so hardcore horror that it alienates the mainstream players who enjoy the tactical and cinematic side of the recent remakes. Fan expectations for a grand finale for the veteran characters like Chris and Jill also create a risk. The community is notoriously protective of the lore, and any major retcons to the 1998 incident or the status of the BSAA will be met with intense scrutiny and potential backlash. If Capcom reveals that a beloved character was a traitor all along, without proper narrative build-up, it could backfire and damage the brand's long-term health. Success in Resident Evil Requiem means delivering a story that feels earned and respectful of the 30 years that came before it. It needs to be a game that feels like a natural conclusion to the current RE engine era, while leaving enough doors open for the next decade of stories. If they can stick the landing on the Elpis mystery and the BSAA fallout, Requiem will be remembered as a masterpiece. Another potential pitfall is the implementation of the hybrid perspective. While switchable views at launch are a massive selling point, they require double the work in terms of animation and level design. If one perspective feels significantly more polished than the other, it could lead to negative reviews and a fractured player experience. The game must feel equally immersive, whether the player chooses first person or third person. This technical challenge is likely why the development has been described as substantial and difficult. If Capcom can prove that both perspectives are valid and terrifying ways to experience the ruins, they will have set a new standard for the genre. Resident Evil Requiem is a high-stakes gamble, but it is one that Capcom is uniquely positioned to win if they stay true to their horror roots. Part 16. The Aftermath. Theme. We're 9 can't just be another outbreak. The biggest thematic shift in Resident Evil Requiem is the move from survival toward aftermath. For 30 years, the series has been defined by the struggle to escape a localized disaster. A single mansion, a single city, or a remote village. But by the year 2028, the world of the biohazard lore is too broken and too saturated for those simple stories to feel sufficient anymore. The Aftermath theme acknowledges that the biological threat is no longer something you can just stop or contain with a single vaccine. It is something the entire world has had to learn to live with as a permanent part of the environment. The real horror in Requiem is not the arrival of a new monster. It is the realization of what humanity has become in its desperate and hubristic attempt to weaponize life itself over 3 decades. Victory, in this new context, no longer means a helicopter flying into a sunset while a city explodes in the background. That ending has been used a dozen times and has lost its emotional impact. In Resident Evil Requiem, victory means exposing the systemic rot and the sterilization strategy before the people in power can finalize a global biological lockdown on human autonomy. The stakes are systemic consequences rather than just local survival. This is why the investigation at the Wrenwood Hotel is so critical to the narrative. Grace and Leon are not just looking for an exit. They are looking for the truth that can prevent a total collapse of the social and biological fabric of the world. The world is permanently changed by 30 years of bioterror, and the game explores the deep weariness of the survivors who are tired of the cycle. Local outbreak stories are exhausted because we have seen every possible variation of them. By focusing on the ruins of the original outbreak, Capcom is making a meta-commentary on the futility of the war against bioweapons. Every victory the characters achieved in the past 30 years only led to the creation of a more sophisticated and uncontrollable category of weapon. The aftermath is the stage where the bill finally comes due for 30 years of human error. The real nightmare is realizing that the protectors, like the BSAA, were just as dangerous as the corporations they fought. Resident Evil Requiem uses this theme to challenge the player's perception of the entire series' history. It asks if any of it was worth it, and if there is anything left of the old world worth saving at all. This theme also allows for a more cynical and mature tone. There are no clean getaways in the mid-2020s. Even if Grace and Leon survive the night, the world outside Raccoon City remains a landscape of militarized pathogens and corrupted institutions. The aftermath is not about a happy ending. It is about finding the strength to keep living in a world that has been turned into a graveyard. This is the ultimate evolution of survival horror. It is no longer about surviving a monster. It is about surviving the history of the monster. Resident Evil Requiem is the first game in the series to truly look at the ruins of its own world and admit that the war might never truly be over. It is a haunting and profound shift that defines the 30th anniversary. Part 17. Final verdict: what RE9 represents for the franchise. Resident Evil Requiem represents a definitive and necessary bridge between two distinct eras of the franchise history. It is the game that finally merges the intimate and psychological horror of the modern Winters era with the expansive and cinematic lore of the classic 1990s generation. By doing so, Capcom is defining the identity of the series for the next 10 years. This is not just Resident Evil 9. It is a statement of intent that shows Capcom is confident enough to return to its roots without being enslaved by them. The introduction of Grace Ashcroft proves that there is still room for new perspectives and vulnerability in this world, while the return of Leon Kennedy proves that the legends still have a vital role to play in the final reckoning. It is a game that perfectly balances the personal with the global. This is arguably Capcom's biggest gamble since the transition to first person in 2017. If it succeeds on February 27th, 2026, it cements Resident Evil as the undisputed leader of the survival horror genre for another 30 years. It proves that the biohazard concept is flexible enough to handle political intrigue, psychological terror, and high-octane action, all within a single cohesive package. If it fails, it might signal that the series has become too bloated and self-referential to continue as a mainline powerhouse. But the final verdict, based on the marketing, the director's track record, and the technical data, is that Resident Evil Requiem is exactly the game the franchise needs right now to move forward. It is a clinical and haunting look at the cost of biological war, and it provides a sense of closure that the fans have been waiting for. Ultimately, Resident Evil Requiem represents the maturation of the entire franchise. It has outgrown the B-movie roots of its 1990s inception and has become a sophisticated and terrifying study of human and institutional failure. The 30th anniversary is the perfect time for this final audit of the series. The game is a requiem for the innocence of the past and a blueprint for a more cynical and dangerous future where life itself is a weapon. It proves that even in a world of radioactive ruins and biological slavery, The human will to uncover the truth and protect the innocent remains the most powerful force on the planet. The reckoning in the ruins of Raccoon City is the final judge, and Resident Evil 9 is the definitive record of the aftermath of the biohazard era. This is the end of the line for the old world. As the credits roll on Resident Evil Requiem, the players will realize that the series has finally grown up. It is no longer about zombies in a house. It is about the ghosts of a civilization. Capcom has delivered a landmark title that honors every fan who has been here since 1996, while inviting a new generation to witness the end of the beginning. The future of Resident Evil is dark, complex, and more terrifying